Hello, my name is Lori Schuler, and I am a chaplain at Memorial Hermann, and I'm going to talk to you today about the exploration of spirituality and spiritual distress in baby boomers. Our objectives today are to understand the life context of the baby boomer generation, to define religion and spirituality, to explore spiritual suffering in baby boomers, and to discuss spiritually sensitive health care. So our first task is to think, who are the baby boomers? Let's get a sense of the context of this generation. They are people born between the years of 1946 and 1964, and that leaves them between the age of 50 to 68. This is a really big span of years. So we're going to break that down a little bit as we go along. Thinking now about the lifespan of this group of people and what they have experienced in their lives can help us to understand their backgrounds. They have seen and done a lot, from experiencing Vietnam, the unrest of the civil rights movement, the excitement of the space race, the sadness and the despair that came along with the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King, the wildness of the hippie movement, the unsteadiness over the years in the Middle East and those wars, the AIDS crisis, and then in financial terms, the boom and the bust in housing prices that we have all been affected by, 2 recessions, the trauma of 9/11. So there's a huge context for this generation. So the dawn of this group of people found them in a very optimistic frame of mind, a group that was countercultural and proud of it, and very set on making their own way in the world. So it's interesting that towards the senior years, research has found that their outlook on life is gloomy. And we're just trying to get a sense of why that would be. We'll take a look at that with the next slide. So why are baby boomers glum at this time of life? Many things play into the fact for this. They are worried about their personal finances, keeping pace with inflation. And they're a sandwich generation. I'm sure that many of you see this within your own families. They are kind of caught between aging parents and adult children that are still dependent upon them. It's interesting to note that baby boomers are more likely than previous generations to have at least one living parent. And I found it fascinating that Pew's Social Trends states that 2/3 of boomers with adult children are supporting a child financially as their primary or their secondary support. And another big reason for baby boomers being afraid of aging is they fear that their loss of function may come with aging. So now let's look at baby boomers and religion. Now, baby boomers are found to be less religious than previous generations, but they still have 43% of a strong member of religion report that they are a strong member of their religion, and only 13% with no affiliations. This all comes from pewsocialtrends.org. But what do we mean by being religious? A set of beliefs concerning the cause, nature, and purpose of the universe, especially when considered as the creation of a superhuman agency or agencies, usually involving devotional and ritual observances, and often containing a moral code governing the conduct of human affairs. So breaking that down, a religion is that which has an outlined set of beliefs. It usually involves ritual devotions, follows a moral code, and of course, most often meets as a congregation or a group. So let's look at that in relation to spirituality. A definition of spirituality is the aspect of humanity that refers to the way individuals seek and express meaning and purpose, and the way they experience their connectedness to the moment, to self, to others, to nature, and to the significant or sacred. And this definition comes from Dr. Christina Puchalski. So, not everyone would define themselves as being religious, but spirituality is a part of our very basic human experience. And it is related to how we feel ourselves connected to God, to nature, to others, and to ourselves, and that with which we find the most meaning and purpose within our life. So everyone has a spiritual dimension to them. So a healthy spirituality, then, is a spirituality that is characterized by rich and meaningful connections. Meaningful connections to self, to others, to nature, and of course the divine or the transcendent. So spirituality and religion. So not everyone is religious, but everyone is spiritual. Some people are both. As a generation, baby boomers are more frequently spiritual but not religious than previous generations. So persons may have intentional and well-developed spirituality or a relatively undeveloped or unexamined spirituality. The same can be said about religious beliefs and practices. Now we're going to look at the root of spiritual need. So we know that a healthy spirituality means a sense of connectedness and a sense of purpose and meaning. On the other side, spiritual need comes from disconnection, from self, others, meaning, purpose, peace, or the transcendent. So any one of those disconnections can cause a sense of unrootedness or difficulty in an individual. Now we're going to look at several sources of spiritual suffering. This also comes from Christina Puchalski in a document titled Improving the Quality of Spiritual Care as a Dimension of Palliative Care. And what's important to note is that as healthcare professionals, when we think of suffering, we think of the physical dimensions of suffering, pain and symptoms. But it's important to take note that suffering often has, and always, I think, has emotional components to it and also spiritual components to it. So now we're going to look at components of spiritual suffering. The first one we have here is existential concerns. Those would be questions that would come when a person is dealing with illness. The questions of, well, who am I in the face of what I'm dealing with right now? And what is the meaning of life anyway if suffering is part of my existence? Very important questions. Another thing that can come up is a sense of abandonment by God or others. People can tend to retreat or feel isolated, or indeed are isolated by others sometimes when they are suffering from illnesses. The next is concern about relationship with God. I often get asked as a chaplain, if I'm having this illness, have I done something wrong in my life, or is God angry with me? And that can be a source of extreme suffering. The next is a conflicted belief system. People often will ask me, if God is good and I've believed that all my life that if I live a good life, then why am I sick now? Am I being punished for this? Or if God is good, then why suffering at all? The onset of an illness may be the first time that an individual deals with this situation or this conundrum. The next one is despair and hopelessness. Often patients will ask, why bother going forward if I feel this way, if I have this pain and this loss of function? Grief and loss, of course, is part of this, and this can be really deep. When illness comes, a person's complete sense of self may change, and they are grieving for the loss of functions or who they saw themselves as an individual in life, both in relationship to themselves and in relationship to others in their life. And it can be a sense of profound loss, which we'll get into more with the examples following. The next is guilt and shame. As I mentioned earlier, with guilt and shame, people often ask, did I do something in my life to cause what is happening to me now? And then a sense of guilt or a shame in regard to illness can be a part of their suffering. The next is forgiveness and reconciliation. Often at a time of illness, people are inspired to look back on their lives and see the brokenness with others, and this can be a good thing actually, to desire to mend those broken wounds. But first they have to work through the process of forgiveness. And the last is isolation. We talked before about abandonment by God and others. People often feel isolated in their illness, and that's a very deep suffering. So we see that suffering is not only physical. So we have to think about that, particularly when we are prescribing medications, let's look at the source of the suffering of the person to decide where is that coming from. Is it physical, emotional, or spiritual suffering that the patient is really suffering the most with? Okay, we're going to move ahead now to spiritual concerns of the baby boomers. So once again, this big age span of 50 to 68 years is a really wide span. So in the next slides, we're going to break this up a little. We're going to look at the spiritual concerns of the middle years and then the later years. So let's look at the middle years. Those would be the ages of people between 50 and 65. And it's at Erickson's developmental stage of generativity versus stagnation. So the goal or the working task at this age of life is generativity, and that means contributing to the next generation versus being self-absorbed. So what are these people dealing with in their lives? In regards to their family, they're busy with the task of not only their own careers, but they're caring for adult children and often for aging parents, as we discussed before. In regards to career, very often people at this age are at the very height of their career, have a lot of stresses involved with that. Or in these days, they may be dealing with the loss of a job at that age, which is very traumatic. And in regard to the health during this years, we know that that's the onset of many chronic illnesses. So, if we throw in a health crisis for people in this stage of life, what do we see? First, we might see a crisis of identity. Often people at the height of their careers have their identity based on what they do for others, both in the family, in the work, and in their community. And it's very hard when they can't live up to those role demands anymore. During a health crisis, there may very often be an existential crisis. For the first time in these people's lives, they may be facing the threat of their own mortality. And in a health crisis, we know that there's also a financial crisis involved. People may have a decreased income from taking time off from work or having to take leave or even having to leave their job. And of course, the increased medical bills that begin to stack up. So we're going to look at a case next. Next we have the case of Joann. Joann is 55 years of age. She is married and has 2 children in college. She works as an attorney and is energized by her work. Joann was recently diagnosed with breast cancer and has begun chemotherapy and seems stricken as she begins to experience hair loss and other symptoms. So here are some potential spiritual issues for Joann: meaning, purpose, and connections. Joann herself, she has this loss of feeling well and whole and feminine in her life that comes with the physical changes with chemotherapy. She may experience losses of her sense within her family as she is unable to care for others as she did before. And I've talked to many women and this strikes them in a really unique ways because they love being caregivers. And when this ability to care for others in the way and the standards that they're used to caring is taken from them, it can be very traumatic. And then they may also need to be in the position for the first time of receiving care, which is also very tough for a lot of people. Another potential spiritual issue can come through changes in work. They really may miss that great feeling that comes with being productive, of being in control and at the top of their work game. And it's a great loss when this is taken from them. And then the other potential issue that can come is in their relationship with God. The common questions that I hear every day at work are, why is this happening to me? Why, God, does suffering exist in the world at all? And am I going to survive this? And what will happen to my family if I don't survive this? So how can I help? It can be really overwhelming sometimes when we meet someone for the first time or someone who touches our heart. When we know that they have these enormous life issues going on, you can become overwhelmed. But really, helping people can be as easy as just taking a small amount of time to listen and to ask open-ended questions like, what is that like for you? Or can you tell me more about that? Or how is that affecting you right now? It just gives the person the sense that they are important, that what they are going through is important to us, and that we have a willingness to enter into their experience, even if it's just for 5 or 10 minutes of time. It can make a big difference in someone's life just to be heard. And as we listen to them, we can validate their struggles. Just simply saying, that sounds very hard for you, can make a big difference in helping people to know that they are heard. And that can help on the process of healing. And the other thing that we can do is evaluate what resources they have to help them through this difficult time so that they don't wind up isolating themselves and all of the losses continue to impact. Often if they have someone to share with, then it can help to lessen the burden that they are carrying on their own. Through talking to them, you may know that they have positive relationships within their family or extended family, and you can encourage them to open up more to those trusted individuals. In some individuals' lives, friends may be the mainstay of support, so encourage sharing with a close friend or a support group. Of course, we know that professional counseling is really important, and it may be your job to take the stigma away from starting a relationship with a professional counselor, helping people to know that it's a brave and a good thing that they're doing in their life if they're seeking to work on areas of spiritual growth or emotional growth with another person. And then, of course, it's the spiritual advisor that may be in the person's life. And that may be a trusted clergy member, or it could just be someone that they pray with. That could be very helpful in just talking about the issues and questions that they're having. In all of this, what we're doing is assisting the person in their own journey to find meaning in their suffering or to make sense of what's going on in their lives. And that can be one of the greatest gifts that we can offer to that person. All right, we're going to move ahead now to the later years. These are people age 65 and above, and they are in Erickson's stage of integrity versus despair. So integrity, let's look at that. It means, can I look back over my life now? For these people, many of them may be retired or their children grown. So can they look back over their life with a sense of gratitude, peace, and contentment? Or do they look back filled with regret? So that's the big task, developmental task of this age. Family, what does the family look like for the later years? Varying, very much varying. Some elders may be independent and living on their own. They could find themselves dependent upon their children or in multi-generational housing. Some individuals may be geographically isolated from their entire families. In the retirement years, some older individuals have a crisis of identity because their sense of self was so tied with what they did for a living. Or with people who raise children, it could be so tied with their sense of being a parent that they feel a loss now that their children are having their own children. And we all know that in the later years, there can be also a crisis when it comes to their financial stability, whether they have saved enough for retirement. So let's look at what might happen when we have a health crisis into this mix. The first can be in a crisis of identity, a sense of a loss of function, physical and cognitive for these elders. And that, of course, comes with a loss of sense of self as they feel these great abilities that they had begin to slowly slip away from them in later years. A health crisis can also precipitate an existential crisis. They may be dealing with the death concern for the first time in their lives, and perhaps the dark night of the soul. Now, what is that? A dark night of the soul can be a sense of feeling separated from God and from God's love, and finding that at this dark time in their life that their religious background is no longer giving the answers to the questions that they had, or perhaps not giving those answers in the same way that they used to. And this can be a great source of suffering for them. Not that they may not find their way out of it again with even a renewed faith and love for God and for their religious background. But still, it's a crisis that needs sorting out before resolution can be found. And with a health crisis, also can come crisis within the family. Once again, we've talked about this. The need to ask children and others for help can be very hard and painful for people. We're going to look at the case of Larry now to put some flesh on this. So Larry is 78 years old. He struggles with arthritis and high blood pressure. Recently, he has become forgetful, and this is very scary for him. Larry was recently widowed, and his adult daughter and her family live in a distant state. So let's look at the potential spiritual issues, meaning, purpose, and connection. The potential issues for the self. Fear of dementia is a real profound one in elder people. That sense that they may lose their cognitive functions, lose control of their life, and lose their independence as a result can be a profound source of suffering. Another potential spiritual issue can arise within the family. And for Larry, this is very acute. The loneliness of widowhood is a deep pain for people. But also in our generations, with people relocating as much as we do, separation from family relationships can hurt a lot as well. Loss of friends as you get older, more of your friends might be deceased, and you find your circle of caring people dwindling in time. And the loss of familiar. If they relocate to live with family members, may be leaving their familiar town or city and their friends behind, and that's a huge loss. Another potential serious spiritual issue is in regard to their own purpose. When people are retired, as their group of familiar friends decline, they have these big questions. Who am I without my career? Who am I really without the spouse that I've gone through my entire adult life with? Who am I if I'm dislocated from my town that I've loved and spent time in? And finally, another potential spiritual issue, of course, is with God or with the transcendent. And we've talked about this, the possibility of a crisis in faith or a dark night, and also the death concern. Just to speak a little bit more on this with faith crisis. During a time of great illness, a person may begin to re-examine the premises of their faith, and also for the first time start to question, what do I really believe about the afterlife? And they may never have really thought about this before. And so people need to work through these things. It's important to have someone that they trust that they can talk this out with. So once again, the question, how can I help? And the solution is very much the same as we went through before. Listen and ask open-ended questions. Validate their sources of suffering. It sounds like this is very hard for you, Larry. I hear you're really struggling with this. Those simple things that we do, the extra 5 minutes that we take time, can really be of help in connecting with another and helping to alleviate their pain. And then evaluate the resources. Who does Larry have in his life to support him? And this may be family, of course, friends, professional counselor, spiritual advisor, or it may come from a senior group or support group, or friends at church. So it's good to ask Larry who he has to support him, and then encourage him to reach out to those people, or perhaps to recommend someone he hadn't thought of before, like a professional counselor. And what will that contribute to? It will assist him in searching for meaning at this time in his life, helping him to find meaning once again in his suffering and in this chapter of his life. Now we're going to look at some special concerns in regard to spiritual suffering or spiritual growth at the end of life. And we're going to go right to a case. This is the case of Maria. Maria is a patient who has been battling with metastatic cancer for some time. She is tired of chemo, although there may be some further treatment options available to her. She explains to you that she has some unfinished business to take care of that is more important. So what are potential spiritual issues in regard to meaning, purpose, and connection in Maria's case? In regard to the self, she is at the point of accepting her own mortality. She has moved past that stage of denial, and she knows that her death is coming closer. In regard to her family, the need for reconciliation of broken relationships may be more important for her right now than taking the time to pursue further treatment. There are times we need to affirm that decision within patients. Some patients may have legacy tasks that take the forefront of their lives in regard to purpose at this time. And that's leaving something behind for further generations, a way of giving wisdom, or it could be a series of letters or videotapes, or for some people making a quilt or an art object to pass on to others that winds up being vitally important for them as they near end of life. And another potential spiritual issue is this desire to be closer to God, a desire for greater intimacy, greater focus on transcendence, or the broadening of their horizon. Next, I'm going to talk about special spiritual needs at end of life. The first thing is life review. You may have found that many patients you meet are natural storytellers, or people as they're aging are natural storytellers. They want to tell you about a segment of their life that was very meaningful for them. And you're wondering if this is just a need to reminisce, but you have a sense that maybe they're doing something deeper here. So very often in my work, I find that a patient, as I'm listening to them, may begin with a single story that adds to another and another. And in time, I realize that what they're doing is looking over their course of their life to search for an arc of meaning or of an overall theme as they're coming near the end of life, to search for a greater meaning, to see what the great purpose that the arc of their life has been all about. So life review is a very important task for people nearing end of life that their spiritual advisor might be great at, but you might be the person for a family member or a friend, or even sometimes a little segment of one of your patients' lives. So another time to just listen. It might be the greatest gift that you can give to another, is to hear about the narrative of their life. Another thing that's very important to know about patients near end of life, and this comes from Dr. Ira Byock's book, Dying Well, the 5 tasks of relationship completion. These are very common things that are seen that people need to, or feel the need to accomplish at the end of life, or to say to those whom they have loved and who have cared for them. That would be, I love you, I forgive you, forgive me, thank you for who you have been to me in my life, and goodbye. So sometimes helping patients or their family members move through these tasks can be very helpful, or giving them the space to do so. And another important spiritual need at the end of life, or benefit at the end of life, is called gerotranscendence. And what is that? Gerotranscendence is reaching a state of transcending the cares of everyday life and self, seeing oneself as part of something greater. A stage of comfort with mystery, with ambiguity, with the unknown, an increased compassion for self and others, decreased fears, and decreased interest in the material world. So some people, as they are nearing that stage of end of life, you may notice as a sense of peace or comfort, even in the midst of their suffering. And as they begin to pull away from human concerns, they're reaching out and accepting the sense of being pulled into the divine presence at end of life. So how do we go about providing spiritually sensitive care? The first thing is to embrace your own mortality. And here's some wisdom from Benedict of Nursia from the 6th century. Day by day, remind yourself that you are going to die. So it's important for healthcare workers to be comfortable with a sense of your own mortality. If you're going to reach out and be there for people who are dealing with this in your daily practice, then you need to be comfortable with it yourself. So that's the first thing. Then, within yourself, have that willingness to journey with patients and families, to at times take the time to look and to listen and to get to know the depths of their suffering, to know that it's more than just physical pain that prescribing medications can take care of, but their suffering may be emotional or spiritual based. So journey with them to come to know that. Listen, communicate, and collaborate. And now, as we're nearing the end, I just want to tell you a little bit about Board Certified Chaplains. We are spiritual care professionals. We provide spiritual and emotional support to patients, families, and other healthcare workers. So call us when you see spiritual or emotional distress beyond your expertise or availability. Chaplains are available for consultation in most inpatient hospital settings and increasingly more in outpatient settings, and hopefully, or as our profession grows, into the community. So who are we and what are our qualifications? All board certified chaplains have an accredited bachelor's degree. We also have master's degrees. We do 1 year in supervised clinical residency. We are endorsed by a recognized faith tradition, and as part of our board certification process, we have to demonstrate competency in 29 different areas. Thank you for your time today, and I hope that you have learned how to spot and work with patients who are suffering not only physically, but also emotionally and spiritually in their illness.